Well, if there is one thing that I am clear about, it is that given the tremendous predicament around ecological challenges, our ecological challenges, and the associated political and social challenges, if there's one thing that's clear to me is that we will not solve them without a significant amount of courage, but not the wrong kind of courage. And that's exactly what we want to talk about today on Poetry, Passion, and Pleasure podcast with your host, Dale Byron. That's me. This is the place where we use poetry in very untraditional ways, where we use poetry to help us unpack the joys, the griefs, the most difficult challenges and conundrums we face in our everyday lives. So let's get right into it. Of course, the title of this episode is the title of this poem, which is "The Abnormal is Not Courage." It's by a poet named Jack Gilbert, who we've done some of his work on the podcast before. An amazing poet. He lived here in the San Francisco Bay Area for a number of years. We just lost him, I don't know, not more than 7 or 8 years ago, maybe 10. But anyway, he is an amazing poet, lived overseas for many years, very celebrated. And let's just get right into his poem, "The Abnormal is Not Courage." Just let these words wash over you and see what happens. The poem goes like this. The Poles rode out from Warsaw against the German tanks on horses. The Poles rode out from Warsaw against the German tanks on horses. Rode knowing in sunlight with sabers, a magnitude of beauty that allows me no peace. Now, are you beginning to get this scene where there's a cavalry, literally a cavalry of Poles soldiers who rode out from Warsaw against the German tanks on horses? And the poem says, "Rode knowing." We're going to see what they knew in just a short while. It's a short poem. They rode knowing in sunlight with sabers, a magnitude of beauty that allows me no peace. The poem goes on. And yet this poem would lessen that day. And yet this poem would lessen that day. Question the bravery. Say, it's not courage. Say, it's not courage. Call it passion. Call it passion. Would say, courage isn't that. Would say, courage isn't that. Not at its best. It was impossible. And with form, they rode in sunlight, were mangled. They rode in sunlight, were mangled. But I say courage is not the abnormal. But I say courage is not the abnormal, not the marvelous act, not Macbeth with fine speeches. The worthless can manage in public or for the moment. It is too near the whore's heart, the bounty of impulse, and the failure to sustain even small kindness. Not the marvelous act, but the evident conclusion of being. Not strangeness, but a leap forward of the same quality, accomplishment, the even loyalty, but fresh. Not the prodigal son, nor Faustus, but Penelope. The thing steady and clear, the thing steady and clear. Then the crescendo, the real form, the culmination, and the exceeding, not the surprise, not the surprised, the amazed understanding, the marriage, not the month's rapture, not the exception, the beauty, the beauty that is of many days, steady and clear. It is the normal excellence of long accomplishment. Those last lines. The thing steady and clear, then the crescendo, the real form, the culmination, and the exceeding, not the surprise, the amazed understanding, the marriage, not the month's rapture, not the exception, the beauty that is of many days, steady and clear. It is the normal excellence of long accomplishment. Now, the word courage, which I've been fascinated with for a long time, comes from the root word kur. It means heart. So I would say a good way to think about the word courage, core, heart, is to imagine that we know our heart, and that we are willing to follow it. That we know our heart and we are willing to follow it. So it is not some sense of war and chivalry, of riding out into a massacre, of riding out in, as he says, a magnitude of beauty that allows me no peace. A magnitude of beauty that allows me no peace. And yet this poem, says Jack Gilbert, would lessen that day, question the bravery, say it is not courage. Now you could call it passion. That's what Gilbert says. Call it a passion. Would say courage isn't that, not at its best. So courage at its best, we see that it is not riding out in the sunlight on horseback against tanks, even though the beauty was magnificent. But the poem tells us they were mangled. So if we are ready to move forward, to do the work that we feel we are uniquely, we're unique in the sense that we have the talent and the will to do the work around the great ecological predicament challenges that we're facing, the multi-crisis that we're facing. That if we are to just simply throw ourselves, into the gears to die, literally or metaphorically, that is not courage. Courage, we are told toward the end of the poem, courage is the amazed understanding. Courage is the marriage. It's not the exception. It is the beauty that is of many days, steady and clear. It is the beauty that is of many days, steady and clear. To know your heart, courage, to know your heart and to keep at it, to keep one foot in front of another, to not let ourselves be pulled off into despair, despite all the facts that we know about. And I know that it does not look good for the home team, as they say, when it comes to the ecological crisis that we are stepping into. There are so many complications. It seems that we are going to step into very difficult times at best. At best. At best. But Jack Gilbert, the poet, the protagonist in the poem, ends with this line: it is the normal excellence. We're talking about courage. It is the normal excellence of long accomplishment. Now, look, those of you who followed this podcast for some time, I do poems all over the spectrum. This poem has a way of kind of we get sort of lost and found over and over again. At least that's my experience of this poem. I don't always know exactly what his metaphors are getting at. I don't know exactly where I'm at in each line. It's like one of those things where they say, if you get in the shower, don't wait for each drop. You're not concerned about each drop that's going to fall on you and keeping up with each drop. You're concerned with that flow of water that's coming over your body and cleansing and it's just that wonderful shower, right? This is that kind of poem. Sometimes we get in a particular line and we're not sure. And yet we know what he is saying. We know what he is saying about depending upon the hero that's going to ride in on their metaphorical or not so metaphorical horse and save the day. Sad is the land that needs heroes. This is not the time for heroes. This is not the time for heroics. This is the time for a different kind of courage, a different kind of knowing and following our heart. That's the kind of courage that I feel we're going to need. Now, I said about this poem in my notes as I was thinking about preparing for this episode, this poem will not let us off the hook with our old tropes and stereotypes about courage. Courage as a heroic act, courage as a kind of reckless heroic act. If we are waiting for heroes, we will be waiting and waiting and waiting. It is we who have to step up. It is we who need the kind of courage that Jack Gilbert is talking about in this poem. The courage that sees the beauty that is of many days, steady and clear. The courage that is the normal excellence of long accomplishments. The kind of courage that also occurs to me that understands liminal spaces, these in-between spaces where we are not sure. Because we are not going to be sure as we step forward into these ecological, political, and social challenges that we're already in the middle of and facing. I also made a note here. I said to myself, what is practical can be handled. Sometimes I've talked about these poems being practical, but I believe in a way it's almost paradoxical. They're so practical that they're not, because something that's practical can be handled. And the note I made is, it's maybe practicality in a much more paradoxical way. Because I said, what is practical can be handled. This poem cannot be handled. It is a living story with a mission much more profound than some simple tool that we can handle. A complex contagion. I love that word. This is, or that concept. A complex contagion is the kind of thing that says if change is going to occur, then we're going to have to be, there's going to be many different exposures. Think of the contagion word, many exposures to many different ideas that are going to shift us. This is exactly what we are facing in the world today, where people who are evolving in their understanding of ecology, who are evolving into knowing that we cannot have infinite growth on a finite planet, who are evolving into knowing that an economic system that does not consider nor contain any information about the natural world is doomed to fail. And so it must be changed. So this poem, to me, is a complex contagion because it comes at the old tropes and stereotypes about courage. It tells us in many different ways that that's not the kind of courage that we need. We don't need that kind of courage. We need the kind of courage that Jack Gilbert is talking about, the everyday steady and clear, the normal excellence of long accomplishment. I also made a note for myself that hero worship and hero dependence, not going to work. The big dramatic act the great leader who will save the day. No, no. And I said, the old expression, the meek will inherit the earth. I say, the meek who will inherit the earth only if they do not follow the urge to look away and in a mindless way to follow the cultural orders to destroy the world, at least the cultural operating systems and the cultures that are still in charge, but are changing and must change. They're changing and must change. And it is going to require courage, lots of it, core, heart, to know our heart and to follow it. And again, as Jack Gilbert says, the amazed understanding, the marriage, not the month's rapture, not the exception, but the beauty. This is of many days, or the beauty, that is of many days, steady and clear. This is courage. It is the normal excellence of long accomplishment. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you so much for your listening ear. I always say, if you know someone who you think would enjoy this kind of approach to poetry, then pass it along. Send them an email. Pass it along. That'd be great. And as I always say, until next time and next poems or poem, please take good care of yourself. Oh, and one more thing. If you can, take good care of somebody else too.